Well, thank you, Tim. I appreciate all that, and we'll get started here in a minute. I did remember someone this morning saying that 40 years would be ancient. Well, you're looking at ancient. So I thought I'd try to be a little bit more entertaining for you guys today. We've only got 30 minutes to cover a huge topic, and we're not possibly going to be able to make much of a dent in it. And all of you are pretty much experts in the area of IP and standards. And why do we have IP and standards? Well, it supports innovation. Why do we have innovation? Because we want to grow the economy. We want to make more money. We want to have better lives. So what I thought I would do is talk about my experience with Intel. And there's going to be some naivete in this when I joined in 1982, both on my part and Intel's part. And I'm going to try to go through some of the business decisions that Intel did in trying to use standards itself and its journey along the way here. And I think you'll see some differences in the very different business models companies use. So when I started in 1982, Intel basically was a two-product company. It had memory chips, a couple different types, and it was beginning to have microprocessors. And the microprocessor business wasn't necessarily a foregone conclusion. As a matter of fact, the finance department at Intel actually advised against Intel going forward with the 386 processor because they thought it was not going to be financially successful. Good thing they were wrong. So what did Intel need to do? Well, Intel basically, just having those two products, needed to do something to actually build a market for their products. So what they thought of doing was, let's create a system where we have other people that can build products to fill in to our expertise. We can build an entire ecosystem of things which hopefully can do wonderful things. So the board you see here is around 1985, and it has a lot of Intel chips on it, a lot of Intel memory chips, which, by the way, went into a standard, JEDEC standard configuration for memory. But the reason I'm bringing up this slide at all is the two black things on the end were connections into a bus. So a bus is a way to connect multiple circuit boards together. Intel wanted to make the circuit board that had the Intel processor on it and memory, and we needed other people to make disk controllers, video controllers, other types of I/O devices, terminal controllers. And this was mostly industrial sorts of computing. This wasn't PCs yet, although this technology was going to go into PCs in the near future. Well, I thought this was a brilliant idea, and Intel really made a lot of effort here, and we had a lot of companies that built multi-bus boards. The multi-bus architecture was an IEEE standard, 796, I believe, and it was really going to take off, but people were concerned about Intel having the patents on multi-bus. And would Intel be charging royalties for everyone that was going to build boards to plug into this thing? So Intel agreed, it committed to not charge royalties for multi-bus. And a number of other companies came along, big and small. At that time, the industry for the information technology industry largely was large advances in technology. About every 6 months, there was a whole new architecture. There was very few companies in the IT space that were seeking royalties. Most of the companies were actually building products and looking for ways to make money off products. The technology was changing too fast for them to be concerned about royalties. So where royalties came up was in consideration for cross-licensing deals. So if you had another big company like Texas Instruments and Intel, or Intel and IBM, or other companies like that, there may be some cross-licensing, and some financial differences would be exchanged. So it was not an environment that was conducive to companies actually seeking individual royalties, although a number of them did. IBM certainly sought royalties. It had a $1 billion royalty business around the time frame shortly after this. And IBM was rather reasonable in its royalties. Very few others actually sought royalties. And that is true today. So from an Intel perspective, Intel wanted the intellectual property to protect its processors. That was proprietary, didn't want anything happening to that. It was willing to do royalty-free on this, even though no other big companies actually wanted to sign up to that. IBM actually wanted to charge royalties, but turns out none of the other big companies, Compaq, Hewlett-Packard, et cetera, charged royalties on the patents they had, because this was an environment where people could start building onto and creating an ecosystem for using their products. So this it morphed into the PCI bus, which is that bus that boards plug into in desktop computers and that does the internal interconnect on laptop computers. So from an intellectual property standpoint, from an IT perspective, there were companies that sought royalties, and there were companies that used their patents more for defensive purposes. If someone was going to come after me, I wanted to be able to have a patent to defend myself and go after them. So even if you weren't asserting your patent for royalties, it still had value, and we needed to promote that. Needless to say, competition law, antitrust law came in here as different people were competing, and as we saw other companies come in and assert their intellectual property. So there was quite a bit of activity in the competition law space, the most famous case being Rambus. That was in the JEDEC memory space, where Rambus actually, they were actually accused of fraud and convicted of fraud in trying to convince the JEDEC Standards Association that they did not have patents in the that would be standard essential patents for the JEDEC memory standards. That went on for many years, and it finally went to the Supreme Court. Even though the conduct of Rambus was unsavory, they did not successfully, the FTC didn't successfully show that competition was harmed by Rambus's activity, and so it faded after the Supreme Court. That wasn't the only one, though. Dell Computer had asked for royalties after not disclosing patents that they participated in the standards on. FTC arranged a consent decree with Dell so that Dell would pay royalties. Well, it would not pay royalties, that Dell would not collect royalties, excuse me. There was also Unical, which was a fuel standard. Unical was collecting royalties, again, somewhat deceiving the other players in the Standards Development Organization, and they also ended up backing down from collecting royalties. There was also other mischief that was going on in Standards Organization. There was one group where a competitor was coming in with new technology. The other entrenched technology was in charge of the organization. They didn't want the new technology to be voted in, so when it came time for the vote, they actually pulled people in off the street, whoever they could, just to have people in the room to vote down the standard for the new technology. That case was a private antitrust case and went all the way to the Supreme Court. There was another case where a chair of a technology committee in a standards organization wanted to undermine one of his competitors, and he created a bunch of false material claiming that his competitor's products were unsafe and shouldn't be adopted as a standard. That also went to the Supreme Court. So IP is very important. There are different business models. Some people wanted to make royalties. Some people wanted to use their patents defensively. Some people didn't even have patents. I'm going to switch gears and come back for a second here now and talk about how decisions were made about royalty-free at Intel and what happened in a particular case. So the slide you're seeing right now is, again, this is about 1985, 1986. Intel's vision was we were going to have these wonderful new processors, the 386 and subsequent processors, and they were going to deal with all kinds of information. We could make them faster and faster and faster, increase the clock rate. That was wonderful. The problem was the reality was different. The reality was there was a bottleneck. There's a ton of information out there, and we couldn't get it into the computer to actually process it fast enough. So the problem is how do we actually get people to buy our new high-end, high-margin products if they can't really use the benefits of that product? And the answer was, well, let's get a faster input standard to get stuff into the actual machine and into the processor. There actually was such a thing that existed. It was called 1394, otherwise IEEE 1394, otherwise known as FireWire. And that was a standard that was being produced at IEEE that would have substantially increased the amount of bandwidth of information being able to get into the processor. In that case, Apple actually held some patents on the technology and was asking for royalties that the industry was concerned about. Intel was very concerned because, again, who's going to buy our high-end, high-margin processors if it's basically a turtle that's supplying it with information? So Intel worked with other companies to create USB. We had no idea how prevalent USB was going to be at the time, but it was important to Intel and those other companies to decide what to do with this. Should it be RAND, a reasonable non-discriminatory, or should it be royalty-free? Now, the RAND environment works well in a number of standards. 1394 was intended to be a RAND standard from IEEE, but it was running into problems. So actually getting a group of companies to do USB under a royalty-free model was the thing that made the most sense. And indeed, USB supplanted 1394. We don't even hear about FireWire anymore these days. That interface is long dead. But that particular type of model and business decision became important for a number of things in the future, including what was happening with cell phones and apps on those phones. So when I was describing the information technology space being the space where companies were not necessarily looking for royalties. There was a couple that had a business model that did support that, but many others don't. However, when the communications technology came into play, those technologies definitely did seek royalties. The companies that were really helping to invent those technologies were very prevalent in that space, and they were pushing for royalties. It was a very different environment. RAND does make sense. It gives us the flexibility to live in a world of standards where there are many people that don't necessarily seek royalties. There's nothing wrong with the business model of seeking royalties, provided it is actually fair. What we're also seeing here, and what I'm hoping to convey in this presentation, is all the different pieces of technology that have gone into the development of modern-day products. And we're going to see this going forward as I'm looking to the future. So the second part of my presentation was to look to the future. And so I'm going to end this part by saying, okay, we have a lot of technology that has come in. We've went from multi-bus to the PCI bus. We've got memory standards. We've got standards for disk drives. We've got all kinds of different standards out there. I think 10 years ago, Brad Biddle did a study of standards in a laptop, and he stopped counting at 500 standards in a laptop. And that was before cellular technology entered the environment. So we're probably talking about a similar amount of standards in a smartphone, maybe 500, maybe more, maybe much more. So moving ahead, next big thing, and I'm going to go into something near and dear to my heart, and that is to look at some technology that is on the cusp of being very useful. And we're just about ready to do it, and it's going to impact a lot of things, but it's based on a lot of pieces of technology. So the thing that concerns me is what's called type 1 diabetes. So there's two types of diabetes. Type 1 is the type of diabetes, and it usually happens to young people, where there's a cell in your pancreas called the islet cell. It produces your body's version of insulin, which the insulin goes in your bloodstream, and it allows the sugar, the glucose in your blood, to be absorbed and used as energy by your muscles, by your nerves, et cetera. So in a type 1 diabetic, the body has attacked those islet cells and killed them off. They can't make insulin in the body. So therefore, that presents some significant problems to them. And we'll get into that in a minute. It's affecting 9 million people worldwide as of the latest stats. 1.5 million of those are children. And it's a very severe illness. What happens is if you don't have enough insulin in your bloodstream, irregardless of how much glucose you have in your bloodstream, if you don't have insulin, the cells can't use the glucose. So if you don't have enough insulin, it's called going high. The amount of glucose goes up and up and up. And that starts damaging your body because your body reacts to it by trying to produce a chemical that will actually get energy from dissolving your muscles and other organs in your body to convert it to energy. That chemical that is produced is called a ketone. And to give you a demonstration of how toxic ketones are, ketone is very similar to acetone. Acetone is nail polish remover. And if you know a diabetic who has had his blood sugar going too high and uncontrollably, you can actually smell the acetone on their breath. That is very, very toxic to the body. It impacts their eyes, their liver, their kidneys, their circulation system, their legs, their feet, etc. Long-term damage gets done. My now 37-year-old son is a type 1 diabetic, which is why this is important to me. Going low is also a big problem. Going low is I don't have enough glucose in my system. I can't provide energy to my cells. So what's going to happen? Well, you could die. And this is a big problem at night for a type 1 diabetic. If you're not balancing and very carefully dealing with the insulin, which we're giving by injections, we're doing artificial insulins now. There's several different types. They have different reaction times, et cetera. But the point is that when you're sleeping, you're not able to adjust anything. You're not able to test your blood sugar. And if it goes too low, you could go comatose and you might never wake up. So both extremes are extremely dangerous. We spend a lot of money, $81 billion worldwide, to deal with issues arising from type 1 diabetes. And the cost of dealing with it is skyrocketing, 686%. So what is, I'm going to show you in a couple of minutes a slide of someone who is a type 1 diabetic who has used modern technology to really get this under control. As I've said, we're at the cusp of really understanding how to do this. There's a lot of things that go into dealing with this. There's different types of insulin, how fast they act. There's different types of foods and how much sugar gets produced by what you eat. You have to be careful about understanding what you're going to eat and put the right insulin in place at the right time to be able to deal with that. That depends on your body mass, that depends on your age, that depends on a whole bunch of things that are very difficult to deal with. However, we do have artificial insulins that we can inject automatically thanks to the microprocessor and nanotechnology that we have today. We also now, for the first time, are actually able to monitor the blood sugar in real time. We can monitor the amount of glucose in your blood, and using computers and that insulin dose, we can regulate how much insulin is going in and out of your, well, not in and out, but how much insulin is going into your blood in order to be able to keep you at an optimal level. This next young lady that I'm about to introduce you to is an example of this at an extreme. For those of you that don't know, there's a competition in the U.S. called American Ninja Warrior, and it's a very intense physical competition. I think after lunch, well, I think maybe you'll all wake up after this one. But my point is that this young lady has got an insulin pump under one arm and a glucose monitor under the other as she's doing this course of competition in American Ninja Warrior. So without further ado, I'm going to start this up. I'd like you to think how much technology has gone into the two things under her arms that are actually keeping her alive, that have gotten her to be able to even do such an amazing accomplishment. You know, well, I certainly couldn't do the first step of this, so let's get to it. So she was about 15, 16 years old when she did this. That was called one stage. Just this year, she won the women's competition, which was doing 3 stages like that, back to back, and then competitively climbing a 40-foot high wall against another competitor twice. Now, the amount of energy it took to do that, the amount of training it took, and how to regulate her blood sugar and everything during the training. And don't forget, she's 110 pounds. That's got to be all muscle there. So the technology that we have can really do, the innovation can really do wonderful things that really help people, help the economy. We're very close to being able to deal with this. AI is going to play a part in this as well. As I said, different foods react differently. They have different amounts of sugars, and the sugars dissolve into glucose at different rates and stuff like that. Well, wouldn't it be wonderful to take out your cell phone and take a picture of the food on your plate and have it automatically calculate how much glucose is going to come into your system and help you figure all that out. Right now, we can already do that with the barcodes on food packaging. People can just look at it, snap the barcode, and automatically calculate how much they have to deal with. So the bottom line that I want to leave you with here is we really are on the cusp of innovation doing some great things. And it's a lot of standards that went into that, all the standards that went into the two devices on our triceps. Those are communicating via Bluetooth to a cell phone. That cell phone, I remember I saying you could run into trouble at night. Cell phone can wake you up. If you are in a car accident or something, what the heck are you going to do? It may be hours before someone realizes that you're diabetic and whether you're low or high or anything like that. Well, it can alert the medics right away. It can actually call out to your doctor. It can call for an emergency, et cetera. So a lot of amazing things, a lot of technology. There's not one piece of technology here that is more important than any of the others. Cellular technology can be involved here, and it's helpful. It's not necessarily the only thing that's involved. There's a lot of other technology involved in just being able to do that course and manage the insulin without even going to cellular technology. But there has to be room for royalties and being able to collect income and be able to have a profitable product to be able to do wonderful things like this. So, what I want to leave you with is the idea that as we think of IP and standards in the future and technology and how much people should get reimbursed for royalties and how much we should charge and how we should negotiate and who's going to be looking for royalties and who's not, is I want everyone to be objective and careful that we need to really support all innovation. It's not just the particular innovation for one standard. It's a ton of innovation which is coming together, which is doing wonderful things for all of us. That's all. Thank you.
Very impressive, Earl. Thank you so much. Very exciting. I think another great example of what innovation standards, whether or not patented, can do for society, for our world.